ask Milley about this. Where's Milley? You know, so there was a high level of respect there, and Milley's apology took Trump by surprise. And it's a couple days after that speech where he's in the Oval Office with other officials, and Trump kind of looks at Milley and says, "What was that?" Right? And he says, "Why did you apologize? It makes you look weak. I don't understand." And Milley just looks at the president and says, "I don't expect you would understand." And that's where we see the break, I think, in that relationship.
And then I think it breaks in public. I believe Trump issued by carrier pigeon an attack against him after that testimony about critical race theory. I want to turn to COVID because, again, you have some of the most stunning reporting I've seen about the president's indifference to the death and the suffering. And he really saw, I mean, he asks you, talk about this. He asks you if you'd been catching his, performances. And then you have this reporting about Atlas. Let me read this and have you talk me through both of these. Mm-hmm. Atlas's controversial theories and aggressive behavior quickly became one of the few things that could unite Trump world. Fauci complained to colleagues that Atlas was a total nutcase. Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary, who had her own casual relationship with the truth, had been reluctant to cite him. "I'm worried he's a little fast and loose with the facts," she told her team. In one meeting inside the West Wing in late August, Birx expressed concern about the upcoming Labor Day weekend and suggested that the White House remind the American people to practice social distancing. She wanted to prevent a spike in COVID cases heading into the fall. "You just want to shut down the country," Atlas shouted. "I speak for the president, and we're not shutting down the country." Birx glared back at him. "That's fine, but just know that you're killing people," she said. The rest of the room sat in stunned silence. Well, Jared said, it's good to have robust debate. Did they really not view the opportunity to save lives with the things that were available to them at the time, which was mask wearing and social distancing, as imperatives?
Well, I mean, I interviewed Trump for the Wall Street Journal around this time in June, and he told me that he viewed mask wearing as a personal affront to a degree. He was taking this personally, and the people around him started taking it personally. And Scott Atlas is a good example. I know there's a lot of questions about why didn't people push back harder. Well, they would be pushed out, right? And people like Scott Atlas would be brought in. I haven't seen before Atlas ever appeared at the White House briefing room, or we knew that Atlas was consulting. He was sitting outside the Oval Office. Trump's political team is in the Oval Office, and the political team leaves. Atlas comes in, and Trump says, "Okay, Dr. Atlas, tell them what you told me." And Atlas turns to him and says, "Well, this will be done by the end of the summer. COVID will be done by the end of the summer, by September."
And of course, we were heading into our biggest spike.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even the people in the room knew that was ridiculous. But the president brings in people to reinforce his own viewpoints, and this is another example where it's beyond chaos. These are dangerous situations. It's a pandemic. It's the worst health crisis in 100 years. And when the president calls me at the beginning of this crisis to complain about a story, it turns out that he's just minutes away from one of his White House COVID news briefings. And he tells me he asks me if I'm watching, refers to them as the #1 show on television, and says that he's used all his prep time talking to me. So that actually what he said is that if he bombed, that he was going to blame me. But that's where there was no attempt to prepare for this. There was no, It was one dangerous situation after the next, and what this book shows, that it was just constant triage for most of 2020 inside the West Wing.
Michael Bender, I want to bring in my friend and colleague Donny Deutsch, who's also, often widens the lens on all things Trump to his pre-political life. Donny, you have a question for Michael.
Michael, first of all, congratulations. The book sounds stunning. I've just read the excerpts, and I can't wait to read it this weekend. One of the excerpts that jumped out at me and seems to kind of really symbolize Trump in the most frightening aspect is his interaction with John Kelly when he went overseas to Europe for the centennial of the World War I. And he basically was kind of touting, Hitler had a couple of things right. He did some good things, basically because the economy was good. And I don't think there's anything that piqued more into this man's soul than that. Can you talk a little bit about that exchange?
Yeah, it was Kelly was trying to give Trump a history lesson. They were going to the anniversary of World War I, and Kelly was explaining kind of who the allies were and who the enemies were, why that mattered, and how that led into World War II. And suddenly they were in a kind of debate over whether or not Hitler did anything positive. I mean, Trump's point was the economy, and that the German economy had performed well at certain points under Hitler. But obviously, Kelly, or basically anyone else, saw how ridiculous that was, right? And Kelly's response is, even if those people would have been Germans, Europeans would have been better off poor and destitute than had to have, lived through the era of Hitler. But it's for a president who has struggled to answer questions about his position on race and his view on race relations, it's a very troubling situation, and again, one that sort of suggests or starts to explain his trouble responding to the civil rights protests a couple of years later.
Michael Bender, you paint a portrait that, people on the outside like us could have only guessed was going on behind the scenes. The reporting is a real service. I want to read one more thing for our viewers. You write this about him leaving office. "What am I going to do all day?" He asked one aide after stepping off Air Force One in West Palm Beach on January 20th. He repeatedly asked friends if they blamed him for the riots at the Capitol. "You don't think I wanted them to do that, do you?" he asked. If that's the case, why does he keep calling it a love fest, and as recently as this weekend describing them as good people? I mean, or how can both things be true?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I wrote a bit about this period right after the White House, in that because it was just such an interesting transition for him. He was as unprepared for the post-presidency, really, as he was for the presidency itself. Aides showed up at Mar-a-Lago in their office space. There was mattresses on the floor. They had to go to Office Depot and find desks and office equipment. This is something that the people around Trump continue to struggle with. There's a real question about whether Trump believes what he's saying about November 3rd, about the election, or not, or if it's just a refusal to admit defeat and trying to maintain his image as a winner, or if he actually believes these conspiracy theories that one after the other has been proven false. So these are, I think that's why this book is really so important, particularly right now and heading into the next couple of years, is because it documents in a way that I don't think has been before these sort of existential questions that people around Trump had to face on a daily basis in